as we get to the end of the 7th chapter of Eruvin, we're going to get into the question of how actually do we make a partnership? The partnership here will be for the alley. So for the courtyard, we make an Eruv Chatzerot. And in the language of the Mishnah anyway, when we're going to carry out into an alley, we make a shituf, a partnership. So that's how the 6th Mishnah begins. Keitzad mishtatfim b'mavoi. How do we make a partnership in an alley? And the Mishnah is going to describe the process, or one of the processes. We'll see, by the way, this is only one of the ways in which it can happen. But one person is going to, in this case, one person is going to take it upon himself to take care of the partnership for all of the residents. He takes a jar and he says, this jar is for all the residents of the alley. He says, behold, this belongs to all the residents of the alley, and then he gives them possession. Muzakelahem. He essentially, it's a bit like he's putting the money in their bank account. Now, of course, they didn't have electronic bank accounts. So in order to put the money in their bank account or put the food in their bank account, he has to hand it over. And when we hand something over in order to make a kinyan on a moving object, we've learned this before actually in the halachot of Shabbat. In order to make I think of Shabbat, in order to make a kinyan, to take possession of a moving object, the person who's going to acquire it has to lift it up. So what are we going to do? Well, I mean, I guess we could randomly get someone from the alley to step outside and to take possession of the barrel, to lift it up on behalf of the other inhabitants. But it seems as though the situation that is described by the Mishnah is where one householder is doing it all on his own. It's as if he's taken responsibility for this. So he's actually going to get his adult child, his adult son or daughter, or his Hebrew servant or maidservant. These are all people who have agency. So they all have agency. They're not his possessions. And they can stand up. They might live with him, but they can stand up on behalf of the other residents in the alleyway and take that barrel of food. And then the Mishnah goes on to say, he can't do this via an underage child. He can't do it via a non-Jewish slave either, because these characters don't have the legal capacity to take ownership of the barrel. And the way the Mishnah puts it is, effectively their legal capacity is no different from his own. He'd be giving to himself if he just got his underage child to kind of take possession of the barrel. He has to, an adult who's not him has to take possession of the barrel. And the Bartanura just explains how it works in practice. He says, look, accept this jar in the name of all the members of the alley, and the person who takes possession lifts it up a tefach from the ground. Because remember, the barrel is still sitting somewhere, maybe even in the property of the guy giving it. So the barrel hasn't changed geography. So in order for the householder to take possession of it, he has to lift it up and put it down, like lifting it up and putting down a handkerchief actually at a wedding when there's a kinyan on the patura. You've all seen this happen. And the Rambam explains that when we're talking about doing this, we're referring to the case where the object being shared, me'adam echad, when the object being shared comes from one person, and it's in that case he needs to appoint a second person to actually take possession of it, and to stand in their place. And then the Rambam says, look, in an ordinary case, if everybody put their portion in, So if we had a situation which is, I think the situation we're all expecting really, where everybody put a small quantity of food into the barrel, for example, then there wouldn't be any need to go through this game. Ein shum panim lamuzakeh. There's no need for him to give them possession, because of course they would already have possession. But it seems from the way the Mishnah is talking about life in the first couple of centuries of the Common Era, it seems like, yeah, you would have one person, maybe someone who took it upon himself to organize the shituf for the alleyway. He would basically organize the whole thing effectively on his own, and that would save a lot of administration. You wouldn't have to remember not everybody wouldn't have to remember to come along and put in their piece of food into the barrel. So the question will then arise, well, kind of how much food do we need? And what happens if the quantity of food changes? The Mishnah will actually begin by sort of talking about what happens if the food shrinks. Maybe it dries out, or maybe somebody eats it. Nit ma'at ha'achel. Maybe the food shrinks. Mosif umuzakeh. He can add to it and confer possession. So he does the same trick. V'ein sarich lohodia. He doesn't have to tell him what he's done. But nitosfu alehem, if there are more residents, if he has to add to the food because there are more residents, and we're going to learn in a minute that the quantity of food required might be related to the number of residents. If there are more residents, he must add food and confer possession, and he must inform them. And the commentators actually talk about a situation where maybe there are two alleys, so two ways of walking out of the courtyard, and maybe he's only made the shituf for one of the alleys, so he has to tell them actually which alley to be walking in and out of. So there are good reasons why he needs to inform. But the Mishnah really is leading up to the question. I mean, the Mishnah is talking about nit ma'at ha'ochal. The food has shrunk or has reduced. So how much food do we need? And the Mishnah, I hope you don't mind my saying, I found the Mishnah incredibly hard to understand. The Mishnah that talks about the food quantity. And so, with your forgiveness, I brought you the Rambam in the Mishneh Torah. And the Rambam explains the halacha in the Mishneh Torah incredibly clearly. And once we understand the Mishneh Torah, I think we'll find it easy to read the Mishnah. So, if you don't mind, we're going to go backwards. What quantity of food is necessary to establish the shituf? You can feel, by the way, that the Rambam is following the track of the Mishnah, and very often he does this, by the way. If you know the Mishnah, the Gemara, you can sort of see where he's going in the Mishneh Torah. And he says, look, we need a measure equal to the size of a dried fig for every inhabitant, provided there are 18 or less. Now, I think that adds up effectively to 6 eggs. At least if you go all the way up to 18, it's six. Oh yeah, he's going to explain this. So in other words, quite a small quantity for each person, up to 18. Aval im hayu murubin, if there were more than 18 people, then the quantity is food for 2 meals. Shiur shtei sudot shehein ki shmona esre grogarot, because the 2 meals is the 18 dried figs. I.e., once you get up to the level of 18, you've got up to the quantity that you require for 2 meals, and that is equivalent to 6 eggs. And then he goes on to say, "Hayu mishtarfim al alafim urvavot." You can have thousands, you can have tens of thousands of people participating, but you just need food for 2 meals, i.e., the 18 dried figs. And a bit in the next chapter, we'll actually debate kind of what size meals these are. Are they weekday meals, Shabbat meals? What sort of food? We'll get into it in more detail in terms of what we really mean by 2 meals. But this is the principle that 2 meals food works for basically everybody, even thousands of people living on this alley. So let's have a look at the Mishnah now. Kama hu shiur, what is the quantity? Bizman shehen merubin, mazon shtei sudot lechulam. When there are many residents, we need food for 2 meals for everybody. And this is not food for 2 meals to feed thousands of people. It's 2 meals for one person. And those 2 meals for one person serve for everybody. Bisman shehen mu'utin, if there are few people, ki grogoret l'hotza'at Shabbat. There should be food of the size of a dried fig. Sorry, the translation's here missing. Food the size of a dried fig to take out on Shabbat. Remember, we learnt that the minimum quantity for carrying on Shabbat is the size of a dried fig. And of course, this, we've talked before about the fact that the theme of carrying on Shabbat is a theme that runs right the way through the Masechet. Rabbi Yudah Nasi, Rebbe's very, very interesting carrying. So when there are a few people, we need food of the size of a dried fig, l'hotza'at Shabbat. The quantity that is the minimal critical quantity to take out on Shabbat, l'chol echad ve'echad, for each individual person. So below 18, we need food for each individual person. Above 18, the 18 dried figs worth effectively serves as 2 meals for one person, which can then serve, an infinite number of members of the public, providing they all live off the same alley.